In the summer of 1794, the architect of France's Reign of Terror found himself standing before the very instrument he had championed. Maximillian Robespierre, once hailed as the Incorruptible, was now perceived by many as the embodiment of revolutionary zeal gone mad. His name, synonymous with both justice and dread, had sent thousands to their doom. The grim irony of his impending execution was stark. The guillotine, which had claimed the lives of royalty and revolutionaries alike, was about to claim its most fervent advocate. This is the story of how a provincial lawyer, driven by ideals, became the face of a bloody revolution, only to be consumed by the terror he unleashed, a terror culminating in his own beheading. Robespierre's fall on July 28, 1794, signified more than a personal demise. It signaled the collapse of an era where the line between revolutionary idealism and tyrannical control had blurred beyond recognition. To understand the tragic nature of his end, we must explore the forces that propelled this man from relative obscurity to the pinnacle of power, and ultimately, to his destruction. The French Revolution was born from economic despair, social inequality, and governmental mismanagement. King Louis XVI's regime tottered on the brink of bankruptcy, while the masses suffered from hunger and resentment. The antiquated feudal system, strained to its breaking point, threatened to plunge the nation into chaos. It was within this volatile atmosphere that Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer from Arras, emerged. Initially, he was a champion of the downtrodden, but the turbulent tide of revolution would soon transform him into a figure of fear. The revolution progressed through increasingly radical stages, evolving from calls for constitutional monarchy to demands for a republic, and culminating in the ruthless elimination of perceived enemies of the state. By 1793, France found itself besieged by foreign adversaries, torn by internal strife, and consumed by paranoia. The Committee of Public Safety, the de facto government, decreed that terror was not just a tool, but a virtue. Robespierre became the embodiment of this radical phase. Inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau's concept of the general will, he believed the revolution represented the triumph of virtue over corruption. Any obstacle to this moral purification, he argued, must be eradicated without mercy. This unwavering conviction provided the justification for the unparalleled brutality that was to follow. The guillotine, originally conceived as a more humane and egalitarian method of execution by Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, quickly became the symbol of revolutionary justice. Unlike the traditional class-based methods of execution, the guillotine offered a swift and uniform death to all, regardless of status. However, under Robespierre's influence, this national razor was used to devastating effect, ushering in an era of unprecedented bloodshed. The period spanning from September 1793 to July 1794 became indelibly etched in history as the Reign of Terror. During this period, revolutionary tribunals condemned approximately 17,000 individuals to death, with many more dying in prison or without trial. The guillotine became a daily spectacle in Paris, attracting crowds who, fueled by revolutionary fervor, celebrated each execution. The tool of justice had morphed into an engine of mass extermination, with Robespierre serving as its chief engineer. Paris was gripped by an atmosphere of pervasive fear and suspicion. Neighbors turned against neighbors, children betrayed parents, and former allies became bitter enemies. The law of suspects, enacted in September 1793, allowed for the arrest of anyone suspected of harboring counter-revolutionary sentiments. Under Robespierre's direction, the definition of enemy of the people expanded to encompass not only those actively opposing the revolution, but also those deemed insufficiently enthusiastic about it. The terror was exacerbated by economic hardships. Despite the revolution's promises of prosperity, bread remained scarce and prohibitively expensive. The assignats, the revolutionary paper currency, suffered a drastic decline in value. These economic anxieties intensified existing social tensions as rival revolutionary factions fought for control and resources. In this climate of fear and scarcity, the guillotine served as a release valve for popular anger and frustration, in addition to being a symbol of power. The ongoing coalition wars, which pitted France against a coalition of European powers, further fueled the paranoia. Military setbacks and foreign invasions were attributed to internal treachery, justifying ever more sweeping purges. Robespierre and his supporters argued that only through unyielding terror could France defend itself against its numerous enemies, both foreign and domestic. By the spring of 1794, the revolution had achieved many of its initial objectives. The monarchy had been overthrown, feudalism abolished, and a new republican order established. However, the machinery of terror had acquired a momentum of its own. Robespierre, convinced that the revolution remained under imminent threat, relentlessly advocated for more purges, more executions, and heightened vigilance against perceived enemies. Maximillian Robespierre may not have personally wielded the guillotine, but he was undeniably its most ardent champion and systematic implementer. His approach was not driven by simple bloodlust, but by a calculated strategy of political terror aimed at cleansing France of all opposition to his vision of revolutionary virtue. Standing at a modest height of 5 feet 7 inches, with a pale complexion and meticulously powdered hair, Robespierre presented an unlikely image as the mastermind of mass executions. His daily routine reflected his methodical approach to terror. Each morning, Robespierre meticulously reviewed lists of suspected counter-revolutionaries, meticulously compiled by his network of informants and local committees. From his Spartan quarters on the Rue Saint-Honore, he managed a sea of denunciations, reports, and death warrants. His handwriting, known for its neatness and precision, calmly authorized countless executions with the same attention to detail that others might devote to planning a dinner. The machinery of terror was orchestrated through the Revolutionary Tribunal, which Robespierre meticulously reorganized to maximize efficiency. Trials that had once stretched for days or weeks were compressed into mere hours or minutes. Accused individuals faced judges who had often predetermined their fate based on political expediency rather than concrete evidence. Defense attorneys were deemed unnecessary obstacles to justice and were therefore eliminated. The only possible verdicts were acquittal or death, and acquittals grew increasingly rare. Robespierre's addresses to the National Convention were masterpieces of revolutionary rhetoric, skillfully blending moral philosophy with practical politics. He would stand before the assembly, his voice rising with impassioned fervor as he denounced the enemies of the people who, in his view, needed to be eliminated. His arguments were consistently framed as a battle between virtue and corruption, the people against their oppressors. Each execution was presented as a necessary sacrifice to safeguard the revolution and protect the innocent. The physical process of execution had been carefully standardized under Robespierre's system. Condemned prisoners were transported from their cells to the Place de la Révolution in open wooden carts, accompanied by drummers and surrounded by jeering crowds. The guillotine itself stood on a raised platform, its imposing 40-foot-tall posts painted a stark blood red. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, carried out his grisly duties with cold professionalism, often dispatching dozens of victims in a single day. Robespierre rarely witnessed the executions in person, preferring to remain in his office, immersed in reviewing cases and composing speeches. However, his influence permeated every execution through the systematic nature of the proceedings. Each death followed protocols that he had helped establish. The formal reading of charges, the positioning of the victim, the swift descent of the blade, and the ritualistic display of the severed head to the baying crowd. The psychological impact of Robespierre's reign of terror extended far beyond those who actually faced the guillotine. The knowledge that anyone could be denounced, arrested, and executed within a matter of days created a climate of intense fear. Citizens carefully monitored their behavior, their speech, and even their thoughts, adhering to revolutionary orthodoxy. The mere mention of Robespierre's name was often enough to abruptly end conversations and empty rooms. His network of surveillance was both pervasive and sophisticated. The Committee of Public Safety maintained detailed files on thousands of citizens, meticulously tracking their political allegiances, their associations, and their utterances. Local revolutionary committees regularly reported on any suspicious activities within their neighborhoods. Children were even encouraged to report any counter-revolutionary sentiments expressed by their parents. This system of ubiquitous suspicion was Robespierre's signature innovation in the technology of terror. The efficiency of the killing machine under Robespierre's direction was unprecedented. During the height of the terror, the guillotine in Paris claimed an average of 3 lives per day, with some days witnessing dozens of executions. The apparatus operated with clockwork precision. Victims were processed through the system from arrest to execution in an average of just 8 days. The sheer scale and depravity of Robespierre's terror is best illustrated through the experiences of its victims, whose final moments were documented by witnesses, executioners, and the condemned themselves. The case of Georges Danton, Robespierre's former ally, stands out as a particularly shocking example of Robespierre's willingness to sacrifice even his closest associates. Danton, a charismatic orator who had played a crucial role in igniting the revolution, was condemned when he began advocating for moderation and an end to the executions. During his trial, Danton's powerful voice resonated throughout the courtroom as he passionately defended himself against accusations of corruption and conspiracy. "Show me my crimes," he thundered at the judges. "I have served the revolution faithfully from its very beginning." However, Robespierre had already concluded that Danton's calls for clemency posed a threat to the revolutionary cause. As he was dragged to the scaffold, Danton reportedly said to the executioner, "Don't forget to show my head to the people. It's well worth seeing." The execution of Marie Antoinette in October 1793 epitomized Robespierre's systematic destruction of the old order. The former queen, now known simply as Widow Capet, was transported to the guillotine in a common cart, her hands bound behind her back. Observers noted her dignified demeanor despite the jeers of the surrounding crowd. When she inadvertently stepped on the executioner's foot while mounting the scaffold, she offered a polite apology, marking her final recorded words. The executioner later recounted that her composure remained unwavering, even as the blade fell. Perhaps no case better exemplifies the arbitrary nature of Robespierre's justice than that of Madame Roland, a brilliant salon hostess and political writer who had initially supported the revolution. She was condemned for her moderate views, and as she faced the guillotine, she famously exclaimed, "O liberty, what crimes are committed in thy name?" Her execution shocked even hardened revolutionaries, as she was widely admired for her intellect and patriotism. The case of the Girondins, a group of 21 moderate deputies purged in October 1793, demonstrated Robespierre's intolerance of political opposition. These men had been instrumental in overthrowing the monarchy, but had opposed the extreme measures of the terror. As they were led to their execution, they defiantly sang the Marseillaise, their voices gradually falling silent as each one met his fate. The last of the Girondins, Charles L'Honoré Dufriche de Valois, had already taken his own life, stabbing himself with a hidden dagger to deny the guillotine its final victim. Even children were not spared from Robespierre's justice. 14-year-old Marie-Jeanne Bissou was condemned for showing counter-revolutionary sentiments, accused of crying when her parents were arrested. The executioner Sanson later wrote in his diary that her youth and innocence haunted him, yet the machinery of terror operated without regard for age or circumstance. Even some of Robespierre's staunchest supporters began to question a system that could execute children for shedding tears. The Conciergerie prison, where the condemned awaited their execution, became a microcosm of French society under the terror. Nobles and commoners, priests and atheists, men and women of all ages shared cramped cells as they faced their final days. The Abbé Carichon, who ministered to the condemned, recorded their confessions and last words. Many expressed bewilderment at their fate, unable to comprehend how their revolutionary zeal had been deemed insufficient. Olympe de Gouges, the pioneering feminist writer who had authored the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen, was executed for her political writings. Her crime was advocating for women's rights and challenging Robespierre's increasingly dictatorial rule. As she ascended the scaffold, she declared, "Children of the fatherland, you will avenge my death." Her execution silenced one of the revolution's most progressive voices and demonstrated that even ardent supporters of equality were not immune from the terror. Charles-Henri Sanson, the executioner who carried out the majority of the terror's executions, left behind detailed records of his work. He described the psychological toll of killing so many people, noting that he sometimes executed former friends and acquaintances. His assistants, he recounted, had to be replaced frequently, as many suffered nervous breakdowns from the constant carnage. Even the act of taking a life became routine, with the positioning of the victims, the cleaning of the blade, and the disposal of bodies, all carefully managed. Foreign observers documented the pervasive atmosphere of fear that engulfed Paris during the Terror. William Wickham, a British spy, reported that even committed revolutionaries lived in constant dread, aware that a careless word or a suspicious association could lead to denunciation and death. Gouverneur Morris, the American diplomat, wrote that the streets of Paris had fallen silent as citizens avoided public gatherings where they might inadvertently make politically dangerous remarks. The Reign of Terror under Robespierre's leadership left deep scars on French society that would take generations to heal. The systematic use of state violence as a political tool fundamentally altered the relationship between government and its citizens, setting a dangerous precedent that would influence revolutionary movements worldwide. The concept of ideological purity, enforced through mass executions, became a blueprint for future totalitarian regimes, from Stalin's Soviet Union to Pol Pot's Cambodia. The immediate aftermath of Robespierre's execution brought a wave of relief that washed over France. Citizens who had lived in constant fear of denunciation suddenly found themselves able to speak their minds without fear of retribution. The surviving prisoners in the conciergerie were released, and the revolutionary tribunals were dismantled. The guillotine, responsible for the deaths of thousands, was finally retired from daily use, although it would reappear during subsequent periods of political unrest. The economic consequences of the Terror were equally devastating. The constant fear and uncertainty had crippled commerce and industry. Skilled artisans and merchants had fled the country or perished at the guillotine, leaving gaping holes in the economy that would take years to fill. The assignats, the revolutionary paper currency, became virtually worthless due to the widespread political instability. Foreign trade had ground to a halt as other nations viewed France as a dangerous pariah state. Robespierre's methods had a lasting impact on the development of modern police states and surveillance systems. His network of informants and local revolutionary committees served as a model for subsequent authoritarian regimes seeking to monitor and control their populations. The concept of preventive detention, imprisoning people based on potential future actions rather than past crimes, became a standard practice for oppressive governments around the globe. The intellectual legacy of the Terror sparked enduring debates about the relationship between revolution and violence. Political theorists have spent decades analyzing how idealistic goals can lead to such brutal outcomes. The concept of revolutionary necessity, the notion that extraordinary circumstances justify extraordinary measures, became a recurring theme in subsequent revolutionary movements, often with similarly tragic consequences. The psychological impact on survivors shaped an entire generation of French citizens. Those who lived through the Terror carried lasting trauma from the experience of constant fear and the loss of family members, friends, and colleagues. Trust in government and fellow citizens was irrevocably damaged by the system of mutual surveillance and denunciation. This psychological scarring contributed to France's political instability for decades to come. The international reaction to Robespierre's Terror shaped European politics for the next century. Conservative governments used the example of revolutionary France to justify repressive measures against their own populations, arguing that any liberalization could lead to similar bloodshed. The fear of revolution became a powerful force for maintaining the status quo across Europe. The Terror's impact on religious life in France was profound and lasting. The systematic persecution of clergy and the attempt to replace Christianity with the cult of reason left deep wounds in French Catholic culture. Many churches were destroyed or repurposed for secular use, and the relationship between church and state remained contentious well into the modern era. Robespierre's legacy in legal and judicial systems worldwide is equally significant. The speed and arbitrariness of revolutionary justice served as a cautionary tale for legal reformers, leading to stronger protections for the accused in many countries. The principle that political necessity should never override due process became a cornerstone of modern democratic legal systems. The story of Maximillian Robespierre's rise and fall serves as a timeless warning about the corrupting influence of absolute power and the perilous allure of ideological extremism. His transformation from an idealistic young lawyer advocating for the poor and oppressed into the architect of systematic state terror illustrates how the pursuit of virtue can be twisted into the practice of evil. The man who styled himself the Incorruptible was ultimately corrupted by his own sense of self-righteousness. Robespierre's final moments, silenced by a shattered jaw, unable to utter the words that had once condemned thousands to their deaths, represent a cruel twist of fate. The very eloquence that had propelled him to the forefront of the revolution was tragically taken from him in his final hour. Perhaps this silence was fitting for a man whose policies had silenced so many others. The guillotine that claimed his life was the very same instrument he had used to eliminate his opponents, making his demise the ultimate illustration of revolutionary justice turning inward. The questions raised by Robespierre's reign of terror remain disturbingly relevant in today's world. How do societies distinguish between necessary change and destructive extremism? When does the pursuit of justice morph into the perpetration of injustice? How can democratic movements prevent the rise of authoritarian leaders who claim to represent the people while simultaneously suppressing their voices? These questions have no easy answers, but the example of Robespierre reminds us that vigilance against the abuse of power must be constant and unwavering. The French Revolution's descent into terror serves as a stark reminder that good intentions alone are not enough to prevent disastrous outcomes. Robespierre genuinely believed that he was serving the cause of justice and equality, yet his actions resulted in unprecedented suffering and oppression. This disconnect between noble ideals and brutal methods underscores the importance of considering not only the objectives we pursue, but also the means by which we pursue them. As Robespierre's story illustrates, the ends do not always justify the means. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Robespierre's story is the realization that he was not a monster, but a man, driven by recognizable emotions and motivations. His fear of enemies, his desire for order, his impatience with opposition, and his unshakable belief in his own righteousness are all traits that reside within us. This recognition should make us more vigilant, not less, about the potential for tyranny within ourselves and within our leaders. The capacity for both great good and great evil exists within the human heart, and the line between them may be thinner than we would like to believe. The guillotine that claimed Robespierre's life on that summer day in 1794 stands as a symbol of justice corrupted and power abused. His execution marked not just the end of the terror, but the beginning of a long and painful process of healing and reflection that continues to this day. The lessons of his life and death remind us that democracy is fragile, that freedom requires constant vigilance, and that the cost of failing to safeguard our institutions can be higher than we can ever imagine. Ultimately, Robespierre's legacy compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and political power. His story serves as both a warning and a challenge, a warning about the dangers of unchecked authority and ideological extremism, and a challenge to build systems and cultures that can withstand the temptation of tyranny. The blood that stained the cobblestones of Paris more than 2 centuries ago carries lessons that remain profoundly relevant today. We ignore them at our own peril. So, as we've explored, the story of Maximilien Robespierre is a potent reminder of how easily even the noblest intentions can pave the road to tyranny. It's a cautionary tale about the delicate balance between idealism and fanaticism, and the ever-present need to safeguard our freedoms against the corrupting influence of unchecked power. Ultimately, it's a story that compels us to reflect on the very nature of justice, power, and the human heart. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this complex figure and the events of the Reign of Terror. What struck you most about Robespierre's story? Do you see any parallels to events happening in the world today? Please share your comments and questions below. Let's get a conversation going. And if you found this exploration thought-provoking, please consider subscribing. That way you won't miss out on future deep dives into history and its enduring lessons for us all. Thanks for watching.